1992, Walt Disney Studios released the film Aladdin. It was received well by both critics and audiences. However, it did not feature the song Proud of Your Boy by songwriters Howard Ashman and Alan Menken. That song was cut from the film, because Aladdin's mother was cut from the film. However, Proud of Your Boy did feature in the 2011 musical adaptation of Aladdin. In 2016, co-founder of Vice, Gavin McInnes, would take this sweet song about a boy promising to make his mother proud as the inspiration for the name of his new political organization. He called them the Proud Boys. This is a video essay about right-wing identities. However,
it's hard to feel safe on the internet, isn't it? There's always criticism and hatred and endless bad faith arguments. It feels like there are whole realms of fascist, nationalistic, chauvinistic wank out there that real people seem to find comfort and joy in. You might click on an article about the horrors of climate change and discover that, 2.3 thousand people have clicked the Laughy react. Or maybe an online acquaintance will post something and you'll click on it in your innocence and discover, it's anti-science, and anti-Semitic, and homophobic. And you'll think to yourself, somewhere out there are hyper-organized, incredibly hateful, horrible people designing lies so that they appeal to as many people as possible. So, what's going on? Why is the internet so scary? And why do so many people seem to like it that way? I thought conservatism was supposed to be all cozy. I thought it was meant to be all economically responsible, all common sense and insert country here's values. A common criticism of the left, of scholars and activists and people like you and me lost in space searching for truth, is that we're not cozy. We're all spiky. We're spiky and we're snowflakes. There's no cohesion on the left, no coalition. We're too sensitive with our respective agenda. We listen for dog whistles, but we don't listen for nuance. And we just can't get it together, Get that perfect paragraph together that deconstructs capitalism and patriarchy and averts climate catastrophe, and we'll all agree in it. Every one of us on the left will all agree. We just can't get that together. And cancel culture is out of control, so it's not cozy. I think sometimes the right thinks we're mean. I think sometimes we think we're mean. And I think both groups are wrong about that. Because the left isn't really an identity. It's a way of doing things. And it's cozier than the alternative. Let's take a look at the other team. The right wing. They've turned the internet and the zeitgeist into a near uninhabitable wasteland of shit-posting and nihilism and conspiracies and boomer posting and science denial. There's no comfort in the right wing now, just abject terror and smug anger. Only the void, shallow identities based on either stomping on the world and saying, you like that, don't you? Or worse, just taking the piss out of beauty. I think so anyway. It's just an opinion. Another common accusation of the left is that we're all obsessed with identity politics. Of course, being a big tent, the left is made up of people with identities. But if that's a criticism, then so is shouting, "You're all snowflakes!" at a snowball. Our awareness of those identities, our willingness to engage with them, to learn from them, to study them, to recognize them as valid, isn't itself an identity. It isn't a club. Learning isn't a cult. But these guys... Do you know where the terms right-wing and left-wing come from? It comes from the French Revolution, where the National Assembly was divided into those on the left who were opposed to the king and those on the right who were in support of him. secular anti-royalists on the left and God-fearing king lovers on the right. Gods and queens versus reason. Things are a little different now. Everybody thinks they're defending reason. But in also defending the status quo and the market and meritocracy and the gods and the kings, the right is forced to stop people from learning. It's forced to erode our faith in truth, erode faith in identity and in community and in the individual. I don't mean to make a boogeyman of the right. I hope I'm not doing that with the city and everything. It's actually quite funny because these conservatives, and I'm loath to even call some of them conservatives, you can blame Dr. Peterson for that one. That guy's self-described political leanings are as steamed hams, but they're Jordan Peterson's self-described political leanings. Oh, I'm not a conservative. I'm just stretching my calves on the windowsill. Patented Peterson burgers. Well, look, whatever they are and whoever they are, they're kind of forcing themselves and their ilk to adopt identities. Crazy identities based on skepticism, meritocracy, dude bro dude, clean your room, alpha, sigma, theta, omicron, gender critical. Identities that have no basis and offer no comfort. Identities that don't even do what we traditionally think identities are supposed to do. But we'll get to that. And now we have these new identities. Identities like Proud Boys and Super Straights.
A super straight is someone who is so goddamn straight that they could never treat a trans person with respect or dignity, let alone be attracted to them.
Ugly mirror images of our identities, identities that came about as a result of oppression. Mirror images and parodies of feminist and trans identities. And sure, maybe some of those boys really are proud, maybe some of those straights really are super, and it fills them with feelings of validation and freedom to finally be out and sing and tell it like it is. But personally, I do prefer when the term identity carries some semantic meaning and some social usefulness. Unlike Dr. P, I'm not a postmodern neoliberal. If you want the essay on freedom of speech, I suggest you check out some cheap knockoff channel, The Libertarian Chef or something. This essay is going to be about identities and what they actually are. And it's going to be really long. But fun! We're going to talk about super straights, we're going to talk about identity theory, we're going to talk about imperialism. Stick around for the post-credits scene. Oh, and one other thing. You don't have to believe everything I say. It's a mixed bag of research and opinion. I am a leftist. I'm also white and was assigned male at birth and live in an economically developed country. We'll get to that. Basically, I have every reason to be a status quo defender, but there's no comfort and joy for me on the right. Of course, being queer, I don't really have an awful lot of choice, and thankfully, I don't want the choice. No, it is here, in this community, that I want my comfort and joy. Comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy.
If you want to know how to keep the government out of your life, or if you just want to know how to make a simple omelet, then hit the subscribe button and make sure to hit the Liberty bell to get notifications.
I'm Irish, so let's take a detour through and about Ireland. Oh, what a great place. It's all green, there's pubs, there's sheep, there's a magical president who's one of the fairy folk because he can talk to dogs. It's the sort of place you can be proud to be from. But wait, Neil, that implies that there are places that you can't be proud to be from. That can't be true. Or am I? Well, at the risk of upsetting the huge portion of my audience who are British or American, yes. Because when we talk about pride, we're not just talking about something as simple as the pubs or the crack or the dog-whispering president. We're actually talking about power. So it might be helpful to go into a little bit of Irish history here in the woods where we're hunting for nettles. A long time ago in a magical land, a free people were living, practicing a pagan form of Christianity, speaking what is, without prejudice, one of the most beautiful languages that has ever existed, occasionally beating the shite out of each other in tribal warfare, and, generally speaking, as the man said, having a lovely time. Until the bad guys from Braveheart and The Patriot, and possibly The Passion of the Christ, I don't know, I haven't seen every Mel Gibson film, but anyway, the British came along and said, this is ours now. Now, of course, it isn't that simple. There were all sorts of squabbles going back even to Celtic times. There were Vikings and Normans and territorial things and all sorts of shite. But for a finish, for the 17th, 18th, 19th, and a not insignificant portion of the 20th century too, the British laid claim to Ireland. Our religion, our language, our rights to own land, or to practice anything even resembling Irish culture, was taken or destroyed. And I promise I am going to talk about super straights and transphobia and all that kind of stuff. We're going to figure it all, we're going to sort it all out. This detour through Irish history is part of an overarching kind of point that I hope will be worth it. Plus, isn't it nice out here in the woods? There's no trolls, no bigots, no one to say, people are shit, and then, you know, exemplify their own point. I think it's peaceful. So we might just hang out here a little while, if you'll have me. Now, the Irish potato famine, or as we like to call it here, the time they stole all the food. You may have heard of it, like, what happens when you take away an Irishman's potatoes? He starves to death. More on edgelord humor later. So, I have a friend, and we once played a game of what's your favorite thing about Ireland, and he said, I love how there's life, he's a bit of a hippie, springing up out of everything. You know, like people live in hot places or cold places or arid places or high up places. But in Ireland, there's mold growing on the jam before you've even gotten it home from the shop. There's moss growing on the tires between commutes. You can't move but for the life springing up out of Ireland. And I said, that is a very lovely thing about Ireland, but if you'll excuse me, I'm actually in the middle of a video essay here. It's a naive and romantic thought to live off the abundance of the land, because it's always somebody's land. We live in a society, as they like to say, and the people of Ireland during the Great Famine lived in a much worse society. This is wild garlic. It's pretty, isn't it? I wouldn't want to live exclusively off wild garlic, but I'll take it home and cook with it, as is my privilege, because I live in a time where there's food in the shop. These people making jokes about the Great Irish Famine, they should have fished. One, you try fishing in a tiny boat off the wild Atlantic coast when you're desperately malnourished. And two, the British had put in place a series of policies to keep the Irish fishing industry from developing in a way that would compete with the British fishing industry. They had no means to fish. They should have grown other crops. Irish people's land was withheld from them. It was partitioned off for grazing cattle to support a beef market back in England. It was given to British landlords who mass evicted up to 500,000 people during the famine, burning and levelling their houses after they left to prevent squatters. Exports of grain and oats and meat, huge quantities of food, were exported from Ireland during the famine. Some grains were imported too, but they largely went to feed British cows. As the Irish starved, more than 25 million bushels of grain were exported from Ireland to England in 1845, the height of the famine. They stole the food. Why didn't they retrain? Who is this boomer watching my channel? While whole families were put to work in the workhouses, women and children, and they had to give up their land to qualify for this social welfare scheme, and the conditions were kept purposefully bad to discourage poverty. Oh, I could go on. I could talk about the fact that the landlords were living in the UK. They were British. They were absentee landlords. The money that was being paid by the tenants for those lucky enough to still have somewhere to live was being funneled out of Ireland into the UK. I could talk about how the population decreased by 25%. We're talking millions of people, and the population of Ireland still hasn't actually recovered from that knock. There's a reason we remember an Irish famine and not a Belgian famine. Belgium was hit by the same potato blight as Ireland. They lost 87% of their potato crop. So was Denmark, so was the Netherlands. But while there were deaths in Europe, they didn't starve in the same numbers like the Irish, because the problem wasn't the blight, it was the British. And now you might be thinking, dude, bro, Neil, non-binary bro, I didn't know any of this. I didn't know. And I'm like, well, that's fair enough, because the British are very good at writing history. They write it all sorts of ways. They're very creative. Nettles. There they are. Nettles. They're all cool. And there's like stingy, and they have like stingy hairs. Nettles. They can give quite a bad sting, but if you wash them, they're really, really delicious. It's sort of a little bit like kale, but it doesn't really cover it. So some people did forage during the famine, and many of them still starved. People stole and were condemned to death or sent off on packed pestilent ships as indentured servants in the New World. Workhouses were packed with women and children. Some people thrived. Of course, some people always do. And they integrated into the landed gentry, often because they were already wealthy to begin with. They all sort of bet on horses together. They still do. So it's not really an accent thing or a nationality thing. It's a class thing. Just in case anyone accuses me of reverse racism against the British. Irish pride, at its best, is a story of survival. A story of picking up the ruins and debris of a self-governing people, a unique European culture, and building something that resembled enough of what once was as to be beautiful. A sort of stubborn unwillingness to be snuffed out. A dark sense of humour, and some very sad songs. British pride, in contrast, it's just different. It's different. Ugh. Let's talk about something else. Let's move on to people with minority sexual attractions. People with minority sexual attractions. Well, that's a dreadfully unhelpful mouthful of a term, isn't it? But you see, I can't just use the much simpler queer identity because the nuances of that term in this context just don't quite fit. And if we get into explaining that, then we'll end up talking about Foucault and we'll get bogged down in that. And besides, look, nettles! I'm also going to use the word bisexual without getting distracted by pansexual or bi plus. That's just another caveat. That's the way we're going to do it. And I'm aware of another more Marxist engagement, whether identity even matters in societies where power often falls because of class. Anyway, nettles! Let's wash these crazy cannabis impersonating bad boys. LGBTQIA. And we're going to be talking about the L's, the G's, and the B's for a bit because there's a new group who want to join the acronym, the SS's, which is like a snake or like a Nazi. And that last part is by design, by the way. They're not making this claim in good faith. They're neo-Nazis. Let's run some water through the colander and talk about Nazis. It's the liberal cook. So it's very important to rinse these guys with boiling water or very hot water because they are still covered in stingy juice and you don't want to get stung on the inside of your mouth. So this is a recipe that involves gardening gloves and living in Northern Europe. Whew, they smell. They smell funny. Just pick some random weeds. Yeah, man. Now I'm gonna eat them. And speaking of stinky, these SS's don't really feel that they're super straight, I don't think. I think that they're just trying to divide us and force us to engage with them in a way that undermines our cause. And I might get some comments saying, well, then why are you engaging with them at all, giving them power? Two reasons. Firstly, if we've learned anything in recent years, it's that ignoring groups like this just doesn't work. And the other reason is that they're wrong. They don't even understand how identity works. They don't understand what it is. They don't understand how we can add more letters to our acronym, but the super straights can't be included. Why do these identities exist? Like gay, the identity. Well, because we're social and because they're useful. Humans are social animals, and we've evolved to live and still do live in groups. Groups are central to our lives and how we practice humanity. Researchers who study groups often view them through the construct of social identity theory, which posits that while we all have individual identities, we also have social identities, which can be seen as the individual's knowledge that they belong to certain social groups, together with some emotional and value significance to them of this group membership. So social identities go beyond just how we categorize ourselves. They're a lot of how our social worlds are oriented. They can give us a sense of connection or a positive orientation towards others. They can give us meaning, purpose, worth. They give us social supports, and they, at least in part, dictate how much power we have. Social identities touch every instance of our lives, and belonging to them might impact our ability to participate in society. It's useful here to separate social identities into two categories. Think of identity as something which can be permeable versus non-permeable. A permeable identity is one which we can escape. A non-permeable identity is one which we can't. And this isn't always up to us. When someone with a racial bias is dealing with a person of color, they aren't going to ask, "Hey, do you identify as black, or are you actually a darker skinned Southeast Asian person? How much does your identity as a black person mean to you? Oh, you were actually raised in a mostly white setting and feel more culturally connected to that? Oh, my bad. I'll treat you like a white person now." So contrast that with someone who identifies as a punk. And I know, Neil, that's different, but hear me out. Okay, so they're a punk, and they've got all the clothes, and all the clothes are all torn up, and they're in a band, and they go to all the shows, and if you ask them, "Do you like Johnny Rotten?" they'll say, "No, I'm a punk." It might be a very central identity in their life, but if they need to get a loan, they can put on a suit. Now, they shouldn't have to. I don't believe in that kind of mandatory switching. I don't believe in banks, but it is a permeable identity. Even if it really matters to them, they can, just for a day or at any point in time, leave. Punks or fans of Arsenal or university students or libertarians, these might be more central identities in your life than race or class or gender. You might get a real sense of community from these groups, but you are, at least a little bit, there by choice. Let's slice some tofu. Look, I'm not a huge fan of binaries, and we could argue all day about where along the windy spectrum of permeable and impermeable a particular identity lies. Like maybe you could technically stop being a Mormon, but if that category is an ethnicity more so than a religious identity, then perhaps thinking of it as an identity you can leave doesn't actually make an awful lot of sense. If it's shaped fundamentally the way that you interact with the world, maybe you can only ever be an ex-Mormon and not never Mormon. Or it's like the old Jewish joke, there are no atheists, only former Christians. Anyway, some identities are definitely impermeable. Think of a theoretical black woman who, in order to fit in with white society, might have to use chemical straighteners in her hair, or code switch, or constantly modulate her tone or watch her tone in order to not come across as angry to reactionary white people. She can do all these things to make herself more like what white society says is palatable, but she can't ever leave that category, not even a little. Are you wondering what we're making? Look, it's a nabe pot. A nabe pot, or at least the kind of nabe pot you can get in Ireland. Let's have nabe, nettle nabe, with wild garlic from the forest. Because it's 2021, why not? And you're watching a liberal cook video. Let's talk about discrimination. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Members of some identities get treated worse than others. Some identities come with baggage, discrimination, stigma. And if you're a member of a stigmatized community, it can really suck. It can seriously limit your options as you move through the world. And if we're talking about a stigmatized identity like the way L, G, and B identities have traditionally been, well, you have two choices. One, try and leave the identity, and two, fight for it. For lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, option one is disastrous. Conversion therapy, ex-gays, you know, that category of people that are definitely fine and fulfilled and Jesus loves them and everything's fine. Or, you know, closets, which personally speaking are very painful. So we're going to fire some boiling water into this guy and then just start throwing things in, because this isn't really recipe, this is art. Recipe in the description. Anyway, it doesn't really work, does it? Option 1. Instead, closeted LGB people just live in fear of their boss finding out, their family finding out, or deny themselves love and intimacy, or community. And look, this is going to get dark for YouTube. Content warning. We're going to talk about suicide. But we already talked about the famine, and this is important. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among people aged 10 to 24, and that is so much worse for LGB people. These statistics are from the US, so things might be different depending on where you are, but in young people, people under 18, LGB people contemplate suicide at 3 times the rate of straight people. LGB youth are close to 5 times more likely to attempt suicide, and of those attempts, they are far more likely to cause themselves serious harm, including death. Option 1, ignore, hide, try to escape. These are not options for lesbian, gay, and bi people. And as my viewers may already know, these stats are even more urgent and depressing for trans people. Option 2 is the only option the queer community has. Fighting. Fighting against stigma. Fighting to raise our status from shameful to accepted, to hopefully celebrated. Because being part of a marginalized group means we're impacted on multiple levels. Our health, our ability to access resources, our ability to share in collective achievements, our ability to organize. And there is no better community to examine for all of these things than the queer community. Look at health. HIV famously didn't get funded or researched or taken seriously because it was disproportionately hitting the gay community. Remember how powerful groups find it easier to just let the people die rather than outright killing them? Remember? Our access to create families has been dictated by the state's decision on who can adopt, who can marry, how many people they can marry, what gender are they. Our access to jobs can be restricted, our access to housing, our access to healthcare, our access to justice. Gay and trans panic are still legal defenses in some countries, meaning that you can kill someone because their gayness or their transness made you so distraught that you went temporarily insane. But we have to mind the super straights and look after them because they're a very vulnerable group and they're super and they're straight. We're famous for creating safe spaces. Nightclubs with gender-neutral bathrooms and careful pronoun use. Informal families will take in homeless teenagers. Mutual aid. Some of the only nice parts of Reddit. And I've switched to using we now because that's how collective identity works. That's part of the thing. And the fact that I can use the word we and you queer people watching can also use the word we is part of what makes us strong. We've done more than most movements to defeat shame. The closet has become a term for the unjust phenomenon of a person forced into hiding of their selfhood. Pride is called pride for a reason, and it's both a protest and a celebration because to celebrate being queer is a protest. And because of the history. You remember how I said that Irish pride was in many ways a story of survival? Well, queer pride similarly is a story of survival. Now, I don't want to paint the queer community as singularly virtuous. The Irish aren't singularly virtuous. In many ways, we were presented with a crossroads where we could have chosen Gaeilge and a new form of socialism, but instead we chose capitalism and the church. Right now, you could argue that the queer community is at a bit of a crossroads. In the wake of marriage reform, those members of our community that most closely resemble heteronormativity have been presented with this privileged opportunity to just take the Pepsi from Kendall Jenner and go home. We solved bigotry and capitalism helped. It's getting muddied, and in some ways the queer community is becoming less cohesive. It's so muddy now that we're actually having a conversation about super straights. What's a super straight?
Someone who is so goddamn straight.
And why should I care? When did this channel surrender to this libertarian madness? Libertarian.
Today's episode is brought to you by Bootstrap. Have you ever worried you don't deserve the nice things you have? Don't let it be a strain. Bootstrap is the app for you. Do you deserve basic human decency? Or are you a dirty, rotten sponge? Don't let snowflakes tell you what you deserve. Let Bootstrap tie that knot, because not everybody deserves a spot on the top shelf. Now, back to the libertarian.
Okay, sorry. I suppose this is why I've focused on the LGB part of our community, because that's what the super straights are saying. They want to be defined by their attraction. That's what they think lesbian, gay, and bisexual people are. Not a vibrant community with a unique culture, a culture that's developed not in spite of stigma, but because of it, as a stance against it, as a brave stance against shame. They think all we are is men who have sex with men, or women who have sex with women. And you'll notice I'm not saying trans people who have sex with whoever, because they don't think that trans people are real or valid. That's like their whole thing.
So goddamn straight.
There are two big reasons why they're not part of our movement and why we can't let anyone be fooled by their bastard attempt to co-opt our identity, or anyone else who comes along with a smarter strategy to muddy the waters. First of all, because it doesn't make any sense. I just can't believe that someone can say definitively and categorically that they are never going to be attracted to any trans person that has ever existed or will ever exist. We are a particularly varied group. We have no shared characteristics physically or emotionally. We're all quite different to each other. I know trans people who aren't into anime. We're motley. But secondly, and more importantly, because the super straights don't have this identity for the same reason that lesbian, gay, and bisexual people have theirs. Even if we say, let's say they're genuine. Let's say, I sound like Ben Shapiro now. Let's say they're genuine, okay? Let's say that they really mean it, and there is someone, okay, let's say, who is just not attracted to trans people for whatever reason, okay? Why would we need to make that an identity? I can believe that there's someone who's only ever been attracted to someone with brown eyes. Where's the brown eye only identity? What would you think of someone who made up a name for that and made it a central part of their identity and the way that they relate to the world? If they demanded to be part of the LGBTQIA plus community because of their brown eye orientation, gosh, we really would have to make the acronym longer then, wouldn't we? You know how there's all those jokes about how the acronym is really long? Yeah, it's not funny. We add letters to that acronym, and we even have queer as a sort of delightfully deconstructed catch-all, not because intersex people and trans people and lesbians are all very similar. In many ways, we're very strange bedfellows. The reason we're grouped together is because of our shared history of oppression and because we recognize that we share some of the same hegemonic foes. These Nazis play acting as a special flavor of straight aren't doing so because they've been subjected to oppression and stigma. Straight people, whether garden variety or super, are not a disempowered minority group, are they? Straight people don't get denied their healthcare on the basis of their straightness. Straight people don't have to argue that their deaths should be taken seriously if they're visibly straight around someone who didn't like it. Straights are the ones in power, and refusing to date a trans person is still frequently the norm rather than the exception. They're framing the argument as if the woke people have won and have turned around and said, now we're going to do to you what you did to us. And that's just not true. First, because that's never been a goal. And second, because we're still debating the humanity of people who just want to use a fucking toilet. Britain is turf island. America doesn't have non-binary markers on legal documents. And I'm a comedian. I like when people laugh at me, but I kind of have to be into it, you know? Trans people are murdered at higher rates, denied access to necessary healthcare, and have fewer rights. The super straights are co-opting the language of acceptance, attempting to use the language of acceptance of the LGBTQIA plus community in order to further marginalize and shame the most disenfranchised letter of the group. It's not how identity works. It's not how stigma works. And it's not how our community works. Frankly, I don't care if you don't want to date us. Just don't pretend that that makes you special. And we're not fucking offended.
I mean, identify as whatever you want. It's not like I'm in charge. Nobody's in charge. Did you know that? Nobody's in charge of culture. Maybe you don't believe me. Maybe you think there's some secret cabal meeting in a mansion basement. standing around a green table and pushing little figures of Ariana Grande and Post Malone around. For me, I'm left drawing the conclusion that the culture war is being fought by civilians, that the internet is scary because it is populated by people. And what do I mean by that, scary? Am I advocating for safe spaces? Am I truly a snowflake as well as a liberal cook? Well, speaking from experience, I have to say that being part of an online community or an online space where I'm not randomly laughed at or insulted or told, "You're sick, you're immoral," that's nice. It's comfort and joy. It's just a rest state of basic human decency. And I don't really think it's fair to make the argument that that's not the real world, because neither is your Facebook group Brexiteers against snowflakes and wokery. That's not the real world. That's the internet, doing what the internet does. And besides, in the real world, we experience things subjectively and then explain them to each other. You don't think that British Parliament is anything but an echo chamber? You think it's a free marketplace of ideas? And speaking of the British Parliament, I should clarify that I don't hate everyone who identifies as British. That's not how it works. I certainly don't hate the Scottish or the Welsh or even Northerners. And I'm not going to invoke the "some of my best friends are" fallacy. But some of my heroes are British. And a lot of the people who I hate the most, who have done the most immediate damage on a policy level or in the public sphere to me or to people I love, are, of course, Irish. We've embraced neoliberalism here in Ireland. We punish poverty. We can be more than a little xenophobic. Ireland can be a scary place to be. If you look at the events of the Irish famine and you ask, how could this happen? The answer should be pretty obvious. The same way. The same way that sort of thing happens now. That same centralized power, that same dehumanizing of the people doing the suffering. That same cult of greatness that must be fed and sustained at all costs. It's not about the British. It's about these movements. Call them identities if you want. These movements that are so paranoid and pompous that they still see no problem when the other suffers or dies. They encourage dehumanizing. Oh, Katie. Oh, Ben. Oh, Dr. PP. You're so opposed to social justice, so determined to say that we started it. But you must know on some level that you're doing it. You're the one doing the dehumanizing. Look at the British tabloids. Look at their history. The Daily Mail's fond words for Mr. Hitler. The disgusting way the tabloids wrote about the Irish or about people from India. Look at Brexit. Look at the way identity is weaponized to create hatred, to strip away the comfort and joy we might otherwise find in one another. Your words are enough, J.K. Rowling. Those words aren't a defense of an identity, they're an attack on an identity. Picture the Irish during the famine finding safe spaces to speak Oscuelga, Irish, our native language, or meeting in secret to say Catholic Mass around a rock on the side of a mountain for fear of being caught by the British and subjected to human rights abuses or criminal mistreatment for the crime of preserving an identity. That's the metaphor, you get it. Ireland was an unsafe place to be Irish, just like now the USA can be an unsafe place to be black or Asian or Muslim. The UK and a lot of the rest of the world is an unsafe place to be trans. The internet can be a scary place to be me. And remember, the super straight movement started on a thread for neo-Nazis. But it's just a joke, it's just a joke. I'm just not attracted to trans people. You can't compare that to the British Armed Forces. Jeez, you really can't say anything these days. Well, freedom of speech certainly looks like a battlefield of the culture war. Freedom to be cruel and never face reprisal or interrogation for it. freedom to be rude and never be called an asshole for it, freedom to not only speak on a platform, a college campus or a YouTube channel, but to be paid for it, Dr. Poo-Poo. But I do think we police our own language when we think it matters. At funerals, you have to be a real edgelord to be an edgelord at a funeral. If someone is in grief, do we exercise our freedom of speech with them? Do we make it about ourselves and our right to offend them? Or no, we could make it a broader point about how the Western world is built on freedom of speech and how if you can't make edgy jokes at a funeral, then this is 1984. This is George Orwell's 1984. You know, the book about loose, disconnected, rarely effective grassroots movements from the left and how they can be an inconvenience to misogyny on Facebook. If it offends you when I talk about how much I want to bang your mother as you're burying her, then this is just Nazi Germany. I don't mean to be so crass. I didn't come to this no man's land of the culture war because I wanted to. You start out defending something real simple, like the field of anthropology. Oh, I don't know if you knew, man, but some South American cultures practice gender differently. And then the next thing you know, it's 5 a.m., and you're screaming in the comment section in all caps on your own post, your social space, at someone who just happened to grow up in the same town as you and now they're all anti-trans, anti-vax, anti-optimism and just turned into a monstrous energy vampire. You're just practicing that same fictional debate with a fictional version of Jordan Peterson, and even in the fiction, you never win. It's such a waste of time. So fine, identify as whatever you want. Do. Just know that it may draw some criticism. Not that anyone's offended, by the way. That's the thing. If you're identifying as super straight, you don't actually mean to be recognized as an oppressed minority under the umbrella of LGBTQIA+, because you don't want to hang out with us anyway, and none of us want to fuck you. No, you mean to offend. I think I can say that. But it's not offense, it's interruption. Directionless, spontaneous speech is interruption, and meanwhile you have the fields of anthropology and global mental health, critical thinking, carrying on, trying to answer questions and make the world a better place, and then you interrupt again, belch, show everyone your willy, scream that you're all offended and that this is 1984. That's what you're doing, super straight, and we say, well, that's not really how science works, but okay, back to the class. And then you interrupt again, something about trans people this time, or Captain Marvel, or some other bullshit, and we're really struggling at this point to see the connection to common sense, or old-fashioned values, or making whatever shitty country great again. When we try to carry on, and you interrupt again, come up with some new name for us, and start screaming it, and on for the last decade. So, identify however you like. Fuck it. But it won't ever function like our identities do. Not ever. And I don't mean because of shame or cosmic irony. I mean in a very real sense. Your identity won't define you like it does for members of minority religions or people of colour or queer folk. You can identify as super white if you want, but it will be as meaningless as it sounds. You'll never need the sort of vulnerable social supports that minorities have to provide for one another. You can identify as a super capitalist, but that won't mean that you'll find a chosen family of like-minded politically righteous friends, like an anarchist. You can define your identity on the exclusion of others, but it won't make you feel safe like inclusion does. But yeah, I mean, work away. It's a free planet, right? Every man for himself. And look, fancy who you fancy. Have all the boring sex you want. Ignore whole sweeping fields of human inquiry. Misinterpret 1984 until it ends up enough like Harry Potter for you to be able to understand it. Just don't at me about identity politics, proud boy. Because for the last decade, the conservatives and libertarians and neoliberal capitalist neo-chauvinists on the real front line of the culture war have come up with the silliest identities for themselves. And we can't help but look like we're having a much better time over here on the left, treating each other with dignity, being congruent, having much better sex, and using terminology that's either descriptive because it originated in the humanities for descriptive purposes, or because we're literally using slurs that you fucking came up with for us because we decided to be in charge of our own descriptors. But hey, you go to the funeral and say whatever you want. Practice cruelty every day. And when you know that there's no 1984 of politeness that will ever put a muzzle on you, then you are ready to speak to yourself. Right? Up here, in your own head, no safe space, no surrender. You take that hateful, edgelord, finely honed brain, Katie Hopkins, and you turn it on yourself. No need for critical thinking or philosophy up there. That's where you really exercise your freedom of speech. I hope so. And you, Gavin McInnes, the original Proud Boy, you make jokes about whatever you want. Make fun of people for being effeminate or optimistic, for having pride, for being proud of things that you wouldn't be proud of if it was your son. Here's what Gavin had to say about the origins of the Proud Boy name.
We're called Proud Boys because I went to one of my kids' music recitals and some ponce got up there, and while everyone's playing the piano and the violin and doing stuff they tried, he gets up and goes, "Proud of your boy, I'll make you proud of your boy." It's some song from Aladdin, and I was looking around for the dad because I thought there's no way this dad is proud of his boy. And of course he was the child of a single mom. Duh. His mother told him, "Yes, sing a song, that's a talent." And there was no dad to say, "No, you're not. Play the piano for Christ's sake." Big man, Gavin. Talk about punching down. Making fun of a child and then dedicating your whole life to that joke.
You know, I've been in a couple of musicals. Surprise! This was me in the last performance my mother would see before she passed. I think she was proud. I think it's okay for me to have an uncomplicated relationship with her pride in my performance. And again, Gavin, I'm not offended. I'm just sad. I'm frustrated that you will have such a mean, petty influence over so many people. And I'm here having a fictional debate with you, advocating for the inviolability of human worth, the nature of identity itself, and what kindness is. Okay, this is really running on. I'm sorry. There's at least one other thing. I think there are basically two kinds of humor, insight and cruelty. I think you have to have both. I do. I think the internet is scary and life is scary and people are scary. And you know what? That's inevitable. We have to have a little bit of scary in us. It's powerful. So be cruel in your humor by all means. But if you go up in that head of yours and there's all that quiet self-destruction and calling yourself a piece of shit, but then you wield your intellect and your cruel humor only to deconstruct us and to call other people pieces of shit. Immigrants all have lower IQs, trans people are all mentally ill, feminists are all brainwashed ideologues, and you're all so fucking gross to me. That's your freedom of speech, and that's what you're choosing to do with it. No comfort, no joy. Because the other kind of humor is insight. Sharing with us your vulnerability. Sharing with us some silly thing you thought. Bridging the gap between us. Telling us what it's like to struggle. Privilege is a thing, but we all know what it's like to struggle. That's life. That is the stuff to be proud of. Make that funny. Did you know that something could be funny and beautiful at the same time? I mean, just look at this face. And you, Ben Shapiro, shut up. Just shut up. And you, Dr. Peterson, you have made zero coherent statements in your entire
career. You invent fictional categories of people and then accuse us of identifying with those toxic ideologies.
What exactly is a postmodern neo-Marxist? Are you anti-Semitic? You've never answered either of those questions. You identify as a classical liberal? What, you mean like the guys on the left in the French Revolution who were opposed to gods and kings? That's how you identify? You're opposed to gods and kings? And you're not a postmodernist? No. Because it seems like every time you're caught making some unprovable claim or making some sweeping, insulting statement about a cohort of people you know nothing about, you slink off into the recesses of barely understood Derrida-esque postmodern nonsense. I'm being quoted out of context. How do we know what we mean by identity? How do we set the parameters by which we measure the meaning before we can even begin to ascribe it to these arbitrary terms? You're a postmodernist, you just have lazy politics. And you're right in saying that doesn't make you a conservative. It makes you worse than a conservative. You're a philosophy denier, a hopeless beef-eating nihilist in the guise of an advocate. An advocate for what? Apathy? Nietzsche would hate you.
Well, at least you stopped the C-16 bill. Oh no, wait, no you didn't. But at least you warned everyone about it and all the arrests that were going to happen. Oh wait, they didn't. You didn't. Oh well, at least you catapulted yourself to fame and got yourself a platform. You could create a cascade of anti-trans rhetoric across the world. At least we did that, huh? At least you were able to put yourself in a couple of comas. Have some more beef, Jordan!
And oh God, we've been having the same fictional debate for years. You sit there representing every muddy, regressive, negative argument against goodness and kindness and optimism, and I sit here talking myself in circles, justifying the most a priori of arguments. It's good that I try to do good in the world. If we engage with them, they say we're offended. If we ignore them, they storm the Capitol building. Proud Boys and Super Straights and TERFs and Nazis. They're a part of our species, a part of our family. What do you think we should do?
This is the finished dish. No, I'm not going to post the recipe because you have to learn to fend for yourself. Remember, keep an eye on the government, keep an eye on your neighbors, keep an eye on your own family.
So that's the video. That's how the video ends. There's my patrons. They support me on Patreon. You could support me on Patreon if you wanted. I hate asking. I'm Irish. I don't like asking for things, but like these people, they're happy about it. They can have access to the bloopers and the soundtrack. And there's Hristo Kolef and the Christmas Goblin, and there's Lou. They've been there from the start. And there's Lacey. Everybody likes Lacey. And otherwise, just maybe like and subscribe. You've gotten to the end of the video. Why not? And ring the bell because the. Oh, that's good, isn't it? Ring the bell. I didn't expect. Who's at the. Oh. It's you. I'm not doing it. Not yet. I'm not ready. I just got shared in the eyeball zone. Thought Slime just shared me. Zoe B just promoted me. I'm not ruining everything with this. I'm not doing it. No. No.